Awesome. Okay, so again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Stephen, for being here. It's exciting to see all of you. Hi, Galia. Hi, Ori. I've been missing you guys. It's great to see your faces. So a bit about our community. If it's your first time being here, welcome. We're startup designers. As I said, shalom. As I said, this session is recorded. We have a bit of a special session today. It's going to be a Q&A, but seeing we're a smaller group, I want you to feel free to write questions, participate. I can also allow people to unmute. So let's have a great discussion about wellness together. Before we do that, a bit about our community. You know me, I'm Shir, nice to meet you all. I am the founder of the community and I organize our events. And that's also a great opportunity to say that we're going to have some exciting events coming up. We're actually gonna have a face-to-face event really soon in November. Crazy, please. Keep Israel safe. Don't make the situation more difficult. We're really trying to find a date where we can do a face-to-face meeting. So just keep the status quo, please. That would be awesome. But except for myself, we have amazing individuals that are co-organizing our community. And I want to tell you a bit about what each one of them is doing. So let's start with Lishai. Lishai manages our Instagram page. And our Instagram page is currently, I guess, offline, but usually is a place where we can share inspiration, share these Israeli designers, things that we find interesting, things that we find important for the design industry. So it's really our place to just inspire one another. Feel free to take photos today, and once Instagram is back on, put them there, tag us, tag Stephen, put inspirational quotes that we heard today. We'd all love that. And you can find us at Startup Designers. We also have an amazing newsletter, and exciting news. It's coming back after a bit of a break. So Michal is our newsletter writer and organizer, and she does an amazing job in just helping us overcome FOMO, fear of missing out. She delivers a newsletter that is short, to the point, and really helps us feel that we know what's going on and we're up to date with any interesting design news. So look for it. It's going to come real soon. Hopefully, if Gmail is not going to follow something, you're going to find it in your emails very soon. And lastly, but very importantly, we also have our mentorship program. So our mentorship program is managed by Ina, and it's just an amazing program where we as designers help fellow designers from within the community in various subjects, whether if it's mentorship for portfolios or becoming a manager or design tools. It's really just our example of being a community and being there for one another. So we're always looking for new mentors, and we're always happy to hear about new mentees. The mentorship program is open on specific dates during the year because it's pretty full because it's pro bono. If you have any questions, you can check it out in our website at www.startupdesigners.co. And I see Michal posted the link in the chat. Or you can reach out to Ina. She loves people reaching out. Really, I'll give you her address and just go and ask her. So I think that was that. And I want to introduce you to our speaker today because I'm super excited by this. So I actually first met Stephen through my MBA program. We had a class and he was the lecturer. And it was just so inspiring to hear a talk about well-being and to hear how companies understand the importance of well-being and the impact it has on employees, and how we should think about it both as individuals and as professionals. So we're gonna have a lot of questions, but Stephen, my first question would be, tell us about yourself. We would love to get to know you.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to join you today, or this evening rather. And as you know, Shir, we've been trying to do this for a while, and the universe has been conspiring against us. So, I think we had your MBA class this time last year, and we started talking about, appearing in front of your community, and it didn't quite work out. And then we even made a date earlier this year, right, April or May, and then we had to postpone again, and then just with Facebook, I think we should have expected this was going to happen this evening. That maybe it's affected numbers a little bit, but hopefully, if you come in on Facebook Live and it wasn't working, you can get this on the recording and it can still be of use for you. So again, great to be here. My journey, it started. It's probably 20 years ago in workplace wellbeing. So actually, just to say, I'm joining you today or this evening from my home in Barcelona. I'm originally from Scotland, but I've been living in Spain for more than 18 years. And as you can hear, I've completely lost all traces of my Scottish accent. I actually say to people, I've lost half of it. Just imagine what I sounded like 18 years ago when I was still living in Scotland. Anyway, I'm here in Barcelona. I think we're an hour behind you guys. So it's 7:38. And yeah, my journey in wellbeing started 20 years ago. I had an epiphany, actually. I was a visiting researcher at Stanford, and I had an epiphany, which is interesting because I say in all of my sessions on behavior change that epiphanies don't work, that we shouldn't rely on epiphanies. It should be the daily change, the daily tweaks, thinking about your environment, thinking about your social circle and how that supports behavior change. But I was a visiting researcher at Stanford, and my PhD was in design thinking. So I am a designer like you guys, even though my path has been very kind of winding from then. But for me, design is about understanding basic human needs. So I started studying design actually in 1994 in Glasgow, and I was one of the first intakes of the product design course, which was a very new course at that time in Glasgow. And there was a professor there, Stuart Pugh, who did a lot of work in conceptual design, and a lot of his methods were then actually used at Stanford. So during the PhD, a few years later, I went to Stanford, and it was such an idyllic setting. My well-being was soaring. I was training with a track team, I was learning, I was doing research, and I was stretching myself, right? Because well-being, I think it's important to know that it isn't about just putting our feet up and having a cup of green tea and doing yoga, but it's actually stretching ourselves. It's becoming better versions of ourselves, right? It's seeing what we can do in the world. It's thinking about the impact that we can have and following our purpose. So I was there, I was having a great time, and I thought to myself, design is about human needs. My human needs are being satisfied. I'm flourishing here. But when you enter the world of work, the opposite is true, right? The world of work, it compromises basic human needs. It compromises well-being in different dimensions: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, career, all kind of areas. And then that was the result. That was the epiphany. And so for the last 20 years, I've been trying to answer that question, right? How can we design and use design to create more healthy workplaces and a healthier way of working? So I think that's the kind of the starting point for the journey. And and for those past 20 years, it's been up and down. It's been very much a niche subject in many ways, and kind of fighting the kind of good fight. And if there's one thing that's been good of the pandemic, it's that it's opened people's eyes, and they've listened a bit more intently to the importance of well-being. And like many things in society today, there were many changes that were in motion, but the pandemic has accelerated them. And the kind of view of well-being, the legitimacy of well-being, is something also I think that's been accelerated. So that's the kind of the quick intro to my story.
It's a great intro, and I wanna make sure that we also mention you have a newsletter coming out, right?
Yeah, so, celebrating the journey, so I've written a few books over the years. Um, I did all the kind of academic texts, and I was looking, I wrote some books on innovation and creativity and virtual teams, which has been very useful the last year and a half. My PhD had a focus on virtual teams, virtual design teams. But in 2014 was my first book within the space of well-being, which was called Sustaining Executive Performance, which actually it tells you a lot because I didn't feel that I could use the word well-being, right? Because it was viewed as such a soft concern, and so I had to use the word performance. I felt to have the book being taken seriously. That was published by Financial Times 2014, and then I published Chief Wellbeing Officer in 2018, and that's also the name of my podcast, which has been going for a couple of years. And then in December of this year, we are launching a new book called The Daily Reset. And I can talk more of that as we go through. But yeah, there's a newsletter that we've just launched. I'm trying to copy some of your good practice here in terms of building a community and building an audience. So we just launched the new newsletter on LinkedIn last week. And that's also a direct mailing list that's going out now and sharing advanced content and news about the book before that comes out in December.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone know, and I won't forget to mention it at the end. And I'll also share the links with you in Meetup and maybe Facebook after our event. So let's jump into our first question, and I want to start with this question. So we all heard the term well-being a lot, but I feel that for some of us, especially maybe because we're Israelis and we come from a very tense culture, it almost feels like lip service. So can you help us? Well, you kind of talked about it when you kind of mentioned your epiphany, but can you help us better understand what it means, especially when we think of well-being in our work area?
Sure. I think it suffers from a lot of kind of misconceptions on what it means. And I think there's different layers that we can look into, right? But I think one distinction is thinking about well-being versus wellness. And for me, wellness connotes some sort of escape. So you think about, right, I need to look after my wellness, and maybe I go on a weekend spa, or I go on a retreat or a way day, or I go to, whatever, go to the hairdressers, or, and just look after myself. And I think there's an association of some form of fixing. And we need to fix ourselves because we often do ourselves damage in the normal day-to-day of our lives. And often that's within the workplace. So we work like crazy, and we suffer because we think that's what work is. It has to, involve some element of suffering, and then we need to fix ourselves because of that. So then we invest in wellness services. And wellness is a huge industry. It's a very important industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? We need wellness in the world. But I prefer to focus on well-being. And well-being is being well within our daily lived experience. So within the day-to-day, right? It's within our normal commute to going to work. It's within our normal working from home and back-to-back virtual meetings, right? It's within the normal pressures of taking care of families, as well as thinking about work deadlines. And so well-being is being well, right? And so I think that's important to make that distinction. And I think when we start to make that distinction, we lose some of those soft connotations that we have with wellness. And a lot of the focus that I've had in my career in looking at workplace well-being is to make it a bit harder in terms of how we perceive it, and to elevate it as a more strategic concern. So actually the byline for the Chief Wellbeing Officer podcast is elevating well-being as a strategic concern. And all of the episodes, we talk to senior execs and we say, where is well-being, right? How can we bring well-being more further up the managerial agenda? And to get people to realize that when we improve well-being within an organization, we also improve value generation, right? We improve the way that we do work, the experience of work. We enjoy work more, right? Joy should be a part of life, and it should be a part of working life as well. And a lot of the kind of general context around well-being in the workplace is also to do with culture. So, we ask ourselves, if we're going to spend a lot of our days and long days within the workplace, what is the culture like? Is it a positive culture? Does it reward, new ideas, fresh ideas? Does it give me autonomy? Does it feel like I'm growing as a person? Is it a place where I can have an impact in the world, where I can pursue my purpose? And all of that is well-being, right? And I think we've went down a path where we think well-being is wellness, it's escape, it's fixing, whereas well-being, really, for me, it is about maximizing human potential and human flourishing. And when we start to change the way that we view that, then that leads on to a whole range of options and a whole range of opportunity that we can pursue.
Yeah. Galia wrote in the comments that it's very insightful, and I completely agree. I think that for many of us, we have this mental image of a person like meditating over a mountain, and that's how we perceive wellness. And thinking about this just being well, it's very encouraging, I would say. It's something we can achieve, I believe, or I hope so. So speaking about achieving that, I guess there are two factors that need to come to play when we think about achieving well-being in our work area. A, we need to work on ourselves, but B, we need to have the support of our managers and our organization. So maybe we can start with the latter. How do we bring wellness and well-being into the work area? How do we convince our managers to the importance of that?
It's a very commonly asked question when I talk to people, and it isn't easy, right? Or it isn't easy, and it depends on the organization, right? I mean, the key thing is that you don't do it alone. You don't be the kind of lone voice and you become a pariah, and people think, what is he or she talking about? That's just doesn't make sense. It's crazy. You need to try and build alliances, right? You need to try and build coalitions, and it could be in different elements. So you try and maybe find an executive sponsor, so someone who by their actions and words are really going to make a difference. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much policy exists. And many organizations have a well-being or a wellness policy, and it involves different criteria. But if the senior people within the organization, if they're not following that policy, then no one else will either, right? So role modeling is hugely important. So it is very important to, try and get executive sponsorship. Does that come first? Is it a chicken or egg, or do you just build coalition or alliance within your own team? And you try and build that in different ways, right? You try and role model yourself. A lot of the behavior change workshops that we do, we talk about, okay, what are the habits that you can start to build into your working life, but which are easy to copy. They are visible, other people see them, and then they start to copy them as well, and then little by little you begin a movement. So that's one way of moving and mainstreaming what we want within an organization, right? But other ways that you can build alliances is that you try and find proof. So some people, you convince different people depending on their personality in different ways. So some people really need the science, and there's a lot of science out there. Some people just need examples or case studies from other organizations, and you try and find a bit of that as well. So you try and build a case base, an evidence base, and change your own behavior as well, and little by little try and build that coalition, right? Getting to the science and the cases, I don't think there is one organization that has the answer. I think there's different organizations that show different elements of good things that we can copy, right? So even Salesforce, as Sheer, right, you have the very positive case of Ohana. It's still a company that has a hard business culture and very fast growth, but Ohana is a very positive culture that I think makes people feel that they have belonging, right? And all of that is part of well-being, I think, as well. So there's other companies that also have different elements, even though I don't think one company has the answer. And looking at science, there are innumerable discrete studies that show the business case for different things, right? I don't think that there's one kind of macro or meta level study of science that you can rely on. But if you look at any element of well-being, you can look at the benefits of mindfulness for leadership and decision making. You look at the importance of nutrition for good decision making as well. You look at the importance of exercise for reversing the aging of the brain and improving executive function, which also is about decision making and also creativity. So you've got many, many discrete studies like that that show the scientific proof that when you invest in health and well-being, you become a better thinker and you actually generate value for the enterprise. So all of those things together, the role modeling, ideally executive sponsorship, building alliances with other people, and then finding evidence through other companies and case studies and scientific evidence, all of that together hopefully gets you on the path to making a difference.
Awesome. That's great feedback. For all of you that have a manager that stays in the office until 9 p.m. and gives you an eye when you leave the office at 8, maybe send them this part of the talk. I think it would be very eye-opening. Okay, so we've discussed the manager side, but what are tips that we can incorporate or we can think of when we think of our own well-being, whether if it's in the office or even on our day-to-day at home?
Yeah, we're all different, right? So, I think the key thing is to have an exploration. So, and this in design, you experiment, you iterate, you generate concepts, and then you find the best way forward, and you detail the most promising concept. And I think we need to take that same approach to our own behavior. So whatever works is going to be different for each of us. What is going to be the thing that's going to unlock, let's say, the key to our own well-being? So it's taking that approach, first of all, that discovery-driven approach, I think, is the most important thing. And to try and carve out space. So we're all busy every day, every week. It's often hard to keep well-being as a key concern in our busy lives. So carving out that space is ideally what we need to do. And it doesn't need to be a long time, right? But it's a consistent effort that I think is required. So often things like journaling is something that I advise a lot to people, that you have, in essence, a dialogue with yourself, right? You actually reflect on your behavior. So it's like the kind of reflective practitioner type approach, right? Which is very, part of design work as well, that you actually reflect on your behavior that day. Maybe you journal at the end of a night. And especially during the pandemic, all of the bad things that have been going on and all the things in the world, that you actually reframe your experience and show gratitude. And a lot of research shows that we improve our happiness and well-being if we reframe and we focus on gratitude, the 1% of things that went well that day, instead of everything that was rubbish, right? So having that space, carving it out, and just reflecting on your behavior, I think, with the discovery-driven approach is the first thing. And then the second element I'd add to that is to try and discover what you call keystone habits. So all of us have essentially something that really makes us tick, right? And that, again, can be different for different people. But when you discover what that is, that's going to make all the difference in the world to your daily lived experience, right? And no matter how busy you are, you'll know that if you can indulge in that thing, that keystone habit, you can reset and you can get back to where you want to be. There's very common keystone habits for a lot of people. Sleep is a huge one, right? A lot of us go through our lives consistently sleep deprived. And that can be because we are just busy at work, we have a young family, and then we don't get back to what we need to do. So sometimes experimenting a half an hour more sleep for a week or so makes a huge difference. And research shows that for most of us, we need between 7 and 8 hours. So research has been done that if for 3 weeks consecutively, you only have like 6 hours sleep, it's the same as staying awake for something like 2 or 3 days straight, right? And the effect that that's going to have on your well-being, your health, and your performance, I don't need to explain that any further. Nutrition is also another big one, especially as we age. Just thinking about, especially things like inflammation in your diet is a huge thing. And exercise, but not what you would think. You don't need to run a marathon every day, but essentially combating a sedentary life. If you're sat in your chair all day, if you're in these virtual meetings working from home, or if you're in your office, that has a huge impact on your overall health and your overall well-being. So those three, I would suggest, as a good place to start to try and find out where is your keystone habit.
Okay, that's great. I also want to make sure that we refer to Michal's question. So Michal was kind of alluding to what we've discussed earlier of how we talk to our managers. She was asking if there's like places where we can find concrete data or something to really help push the envelope and help the organization move into a more well-being cultural mindset. Can you share with us if there are any resources that we can check out?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably my bibliography for the books, but I'm trying to think just off the top of my head. A lot of the positive psychology work is really valuable. I mean, look, you get the commercial, let's say, consultants that are out there. So someone like Arianna Huffington, who's really mainstreamed a lot of the approach to well-being. So there's a lot of value in Thrive Global as a website, because what she's also done there is that she's given a platform for the community to publish. So everyone is published there, right? So it's not just everyone's viewpoint, and obviously quality might be up and down because of that. There's no peer review, but it's a huge database of practice, let's say. So something that could be useful. And then on the more scientific side, you can go to different schools that have a positive psychology focus, especially. Well-being as a science is still a very young field, right? You've got maybe the Yale course, the Science of Wellbeing, which has been very popular the last couple of years. But if you go to somewhere like Berkeley, they've got the Doing Well and Doing Good Center, positive psychology. There's a lot of good stuff in there. You've got Michigan Ross School of Business in the US, also positive psychology field. There's a lot of nice work in there as well. And so for now, that's maybe the places that I would look. Because again, coming back to that very first point on distinguishing between wellness and well-being, if you just go for a general Google search, you're going to get a lot of nonsense, right? And it's not easy to curate that effectively and to distinguish between things that really are not going to make the difference and things that are. So anyway, positive psychology, I think, until well-being emerges as a field really in its own right, that's a nice home, let's say, because you can even trace that back to a lot of the kind of ancient philosophy on human flourishing. So even if you go back to philosophy like Aristotle, Plato, even Confucius, a lot of the questions that they would ask is the questions that we're still trying to answer today, right? What is a good life? What role does work have in life? How do we have an impact? What's our purpose? All of these are well-being related questions, and for centuries we've been trying to ask them, right? So anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And there's a question that I think might take us into a bit of a different direction, but I was curious about it. It came up in our questions and I thought it was really interesting. You've mentioned well-being in history. You mentioned well-being in different educational institutions, mostly Americans, if I'm not mistaken. And you yourself are Scottish, living in Spain, talking to Israel. So one of the questions that came up was what's the difference that you came across when you've been discussing well-being around the world? And if you have any highlights or any things that you would recommend us to kind of think of, especially because most of us are also working with people from different places in the world in different time zones.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. A few years ago, every course that I delivered was to a European audience. And then I had the opportunity to travel to China to teach well-being within the business school in Shanghai. And I was really worried because I thought, I don't know if this is going to fly, right? Everything that I've been talking about, are they going to get it, right? And they got it. They loved it, right? Even more so than the Europeans. And what I then started to realize was, in terms of culture, we can look at that in different ways, right? Culture is national culture. but culture is also company culture, and culture is also generational culture. And what I was finding was that the people who I were talking to had a lot of, let's say, pain points in common. So if we borrow a term from design, that they were suffering under the same trends that were happening within the workplace as a result of the technological revolution, as a result of business getting faster, as a result of us all getting busier. And so really, I don't know if this helps much as an answer, but a lot of these needs I have felt over the years, and I've taught, all over the world, is that they are pretty much universal in our human needs that we need, right? The one difference might be, the couple of differentiating factors might be in terms of age group, right? So you get senior execs who are already broken, let's say, and they want to try and fix themselves. And then you get the younger generation coming up who have changed their attitudes in terms of it isn't just about the job. They are not prepared like maybe my generation, the generation before were in general, to suffer to such an extent just to get ahead within their career. I think the generation that are now entering the world of work, or even now going into kind of middle management positions, are absolutely concerned with the environment. They're absolutely concerned with making a difference in the world and improving society. It isn't just about making a ton load of cash. It isn't just about advancing through the organisation, right? So I think that's a positive thing. And so they are generally more interested in the messages of well-being and integrating that early within their careers. And then the other differentiating factor is just in terms of where you are in the world and the approach to kind of business, right? So the US, absolutely significantly different in my view to most of Europe and indeed most of the world. I know you guys have a really strong startup culture, so maybe that also gives you that real always working kind of vibe. I don't know, right? US, absolutely. Some people don't even take their full vacation allocation during the year. So trying to convince people just to take time off is kind of difficult. Japan also, you get the culture of karoshi, which means overwork. And you see a lot of professionals in Japan just like having a nap on a park bench because they're working every single hour that they're breathing. And so they need to take a 10-minute nap just to get through their kind of monstrous 14, 16-hour working days, right? So anyway, there's some reflections on culture for you around the world.
I think that's really interesting. And especially as you said, we are mimicking the American working culture. So for us, looking at that and thinking about well-being is highly important. I want to tell some questions in the chat. I'll get to them in a second, but I want to kind of connect to what you just said while putting our hat as designers. So almost all of us are UX or UX UI designers. And we're designing products that our users are going to use in their day-to-day, whether if it's B2B or B2C. How can we as designers can think about the well-being of the users, and how should we incorporate it into our work?
I think design, there is a natural fit there to well-being, right? I think if you look at just human experience, right? Well-being for me it's in different elements. So you get different models of well-being, right? So you get physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, career, financial. I don't know if that's 5 or 6, right? But I think that's the main elements. It covers different elements of human experience. And UX, it's about experience, right? How you engage with something, how you engage with a product, how you engage with a service, how you engage with an app. And I think just thinking about human experience and particularly emotions on a general level when you're designing, I think that to me has a natural link to well-being. I think if you look at the best designed products and services, they delight the end user. And even just that emotion of delight or joy, when you engage with a product, when you open the product or when you use the service, that improves your well-being, right? If you go back to kind of classic design approaches like maybe Dieter Rams. Their whole approach was rooted in, of course, function was important, but it was also kind of human experience and the power of simplicity. And if you look at beautiful architecture or buildings, right? If you look at even here in Barcelona, the Mies van der Rohe Pavilion, imagine living in a place like that, right? The sheer joy and the well-being that you would have, right? So I think design has a role in we can be surrounded by beauty. We elevate, I think. We can elevate human experience. So, I think just thinking about that more deeply, and I think during the pandemic, our emotional needs were absolutely, compromised, right? And I think we need to, as we come out of the pandemic and there's less restrictions, I think it's about rediscovering our own needs and rituals, and maybe that's engaging with a product that a designer designs, right? So again, it could be a product, it could be a tangible thing, it could be a service, and how do you really improve the emotional well-being, particularly, but just different facets of those well-being. Look, you get products as well, even in terms of the products that are out there that are within the kind of quantified self domain. Things that will measure different elements of your well-being or wellness, that will track your sleep, that will track your activity. Some are just purely functional, right? And all they do will track. The product itself doesn't do much for your well-being, but then you've got others that just seem to be a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more kind of transparent, like maybe the Whoop band, for example. It just seems a better designed product, right? So it's for your well-being, but it also seems also to just fit with that notion of self-care and well-being as well, and not just like a digital app that might measure your sleep, but essentially you're just going to be tied more time to your phone, and then you're going to be addicted to the dopamine that's coming off it, and then your well-being is going to go down, right? So there's a few things in there I think might be interesting.
Yeah, I think you said something really important, because for a lot of us, when we design, we think of KPIs like, how can we get more users? How can we keep them more time in the app? How can we get them to buy? Depends, again, if it's B2B or B2C, but it's not really about, are they happy? Even like customer satisfaction scores are not about the users being happy. It's about the users telling other users to come. So like saying we are designers working on experiences and we need to make the experience a good experience. I think it's something we can all think of more thoroughly and connect to more strongly.
Look,
yeah.
I mean, even on that, it's a huge area, right? I think, you can design something. We all know what works in a digital sense, right? And the big tech companies, they were the forerunners within that, and in many ways they kind of exploited human weakness. So many of us are addicted. In fact, all of us are addicted, right? I mean, even my son this evening, I thought, no more screens. The weekend was tough. But the thing is, and I put this in my new book, if I take the tablet from him, the first thing that he does is go to the kitchen and look for a chocolate biscuit, right? Because it's the same processes that are in play. So I've taken away the sugar for his brain, that is the tablet, and then he goes and he looks for sugar, right? So we're all addicted. So we can design, or you guys, because I'm not a designer or a practicing designer, you can design things that are going to satisfy those KPIs. They're going to be sticky in the fact that people are going to engage with your product. But if they're addicted rather than happy, and they're just kind of doom scrolling, or they're coming back and it's a negative emotion, how sustainable is that in the longer term, right? So I think it's maybe being brave to sacrifice some of that short-term gain in stickiness to actually delight people in the longer term. I don't know if that's feasible, but it's a huge question, right?
Yeah, and definitely something we should all keep in mind. You mentioned apps, earlier, and Aviv was asking about apps in the chat. So do you have any apps that you can recommend us, whether if it's work-related or self-related, that can help us work on our well-being, especially if it's not something we've been prioritizing so far?
You know, the best app, and it's not really a good answer, your answer you're looking for, that's the best app, right? That's the best in that. Is that just an old guy's answer? Look, there's a ton of stuff out there, and you know, you got the big ones like Headspace and Calm, Sleep Cycle maybe, and you know, yeah, beneficial. I'm sure. It's the choice that you want to make, though. Do you want to have a digital solution, or do you want to just get down to basics? That is maybe picking up a pen and writing on a piece of paper. You know, I think I would go for the basics, right? And then complement that maybe with a bit of tech. Look, I'm an athlete. I've measured that whole aspect of tracking. I think it's hugely important. But you can track with a notebook, a moleskin, and a pen as well. And I think invest also. A lot of the coaching that I do, I say to people, don't just pick up any scrap of paper and have an old pencil, but have a good writing book, right? Something that is yours, that is special. Have a good pen or a good pencil, right? And just go for that and just discover that way, right? I don't know if that's the answer you were wanting.
No, but it's a fair answer, and maybe it's actually a blessing that Facebook fell today, and we don't have Facebook during our meeting today. I think it's a great tip. I want to move to Hila's question. It kind of connects as well. So, Hila, I gave you the option to unmute just to, if you wanna make sure that I'm asking the question correctly. But she asked, what is the role of screens and tech transformation in our well-being aspirations?
I can even add to that I am practice yoga for many years, and 10 years ago, one of the yoga teacher mentioned that as the screen becomes smaller, we becomes to be more annoyed and instinctive, and this is why many arguments you find on WhatsApp and you wouldn't find in normal life. So it's connect to what you said. As designers, we want to attract consumers, but in a way the tech also preventing from us from really being engaged to the moment.
Yeah I think it's a good point. I think it's just about rationing time, taking breaks away from digital devices. Different things happen. You get that dopamine production, and we get addicted to dopamine, and then we find it hard to come away from it, right? And I think you're right. I mean, if you're straining your eyes as well on a smaller screen, and that's not going to be good, and it's going to affect things like posture. So it's like, I think at the end of the day, it's recognizing that technology is hugely beneficial, right? I mean, it's bringing us together this evening, and it will continue to be. But I think in the future, you're seeing evidence of this, right? So the new iOS, it has many more prompts for going into focus mode, whereby you will turn off notifications. At the very beginning of the big tech revolution, it was just pushing you everything, and it was trying to just keep you online, keep you engaged. And I think now it'll become more sophisticated as we go forward. Are we there yet? No, absolutely not. I think at the end of the day, it's recognizing the huge benefits that technology has, that we live in a virtual world. That we live in a physical world, right? So even though, and I say this from looking at virtual teams 20 years ago, we still live in a physical world. I think, even with the working from home and the pandemic, it's taught us that even more. So even things like, if you're sitting down too much, you hunch your shoulders, your posture gets worse, that sends a signal to your brain that tells you you're helpless. So your physical position affects your emotional state. But the opposite is also true. So this is embodied cognition theory. So even if you just bring your shoulders back, right? So if you're sitting down all day, if you bring your shoulders back, you open up the spine, so you get benefits in terms of spinal health. You also open up the lungs, so you get more oxygen, and then you get more oxygen to your brain, and you feel more powerful, you feel more confident, right? So if you find that you're in meetings, or you're just trying to work, and you're all day and you're hunched down, that's going to affect how you think, right? So at the end of the day, you know, we're physical beings. I just think that we can't forget about the physical, the technology, the virtual as an add-on, but we need to remain in control, right? And I think we've lost a bit of control over the past few years, but hopefully we'll get it back.
That's wonderful. And I already kind of fixed my fixture. So I wanna think about everyone's well-being and be cautious of time because it's rather late in Israel. So maybe we can do one final question if it's okay with you, Stephen.
Sure.
So you might have kind of picked it up, but in Israel, people are getting back to the office. I don't know what's the situation in Spain right now. But people are getting back to the office. They are traveling in either public or personal transportation, and their life are getting back to being a bit more hectic, a bit more difficult. Do you have any tips for those people that are spending a lot of time in the car, in the office, rushing everywhere? Any tips how they can take that first step and prioritize themselves?
I think there's many things, right? And it depends on the context a lot for different people. Everyone has their own battle to fight each day, and different things are going on. But I think if there's one thing just to keep in mind, it is recognizing that the things that happen, like things are going to happen, right? That's just part of life. You're going to have a crap day, you're going to have a good day, you're going to have a disastrous day, you're going to have a great day. It's the roller coaster of our lives, right? I think the important thing is to remember that's going to happen. Our response is the most important thing. So we can make things better or worse, and we can often make them significantly worse. And I think that's the key message there. So Charles Swindoll, he said, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react. So I think that would be the one thing to bear in mind, because we're going to go back into complexity. Stuff's going to happen, and it's outside of our control. So the add-on to that is that we can worry and we can stress about things. And these could be things that are keeping us awake at night. But the thing is, even if these things are the most important things in the world, if they are outside of your control, it doesn't matter how much time you spend worrying about them, because you're not going to change them, right? So a kind of good method that I often advise to people is to write down a list, which is your kind of worry list. What are the things that are stressing you out? And hopefully there's not too many on that list, but maybe you just go for the top 6 or whatever, and you go through one by one and you say, is this within my control? Yes or no? Can I influence this to a degree? Yes or no? If it is 100% outside of your control, put a line through it. It doesn't matter how important it is, right? Because you've got limited time and you've got limited energy. So focus that time and that energy on the things that you can control. So I think with those two things, that hopefully would be valuable going ahead, as we all go back into a bit more of a chaotic world.
I think that's a brilliant tip. I think it speaks to so many of us. For me personally, like, I can't control what I can control, and I can't worry about what I can change. That's so simple, but so important. Stephen, I loved this session. We don't spend enough time talking about well-being. I really appreciate it. It was really inspirational. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And again, share with us the links to the books and the newsletter. I'm sure many of us would like to join and to learn more about those. And thank you so much for your time. I'm so happy we finally had the opportunity to do this.
At last. Okay, thank you, Shir. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.